Hello, everyone. My name is Mr. Walsh. Welcome to today's show. Thank you so much for joining us here today on Newsflash. We got a good one for you as always. Today, we are dealing with some drama in the Speakership, where Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida has moved on Monday to try and kick Speaker Kevin McCarthy out after passing. By the way, we got to get to that deal. They passed a deal to avert the government shutdown. We'll break all that down. We'll break down the response to that by some on the far right and how really kind of demonstrably bad it could be. And also, it puts the Democrats in a pretty interesting situation where they have a little bit of leverage to try and help bail McCarthy out from this Matt Gaetz far-right inspired attack. Also, we have a really great, really interesting piece from one of the top foreign policy writers on the left, Seamus Malik-Kafsali, in Jacobin, talking about the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel and how the U.S. is kind of like that friend, that wingman friend, trying to set them up and push them together, and why that matters in such a big way. Also, Josh Gottheimer is headlining a no labels call, or just recently, even as he insists he has no desire to run for president. So we will be keeping a pretty close eye on that as well. We got a great show, a lot of important stories. This is your Monday News Flash. All right, so pleased to have you here today. We're going to get right into it. So, a pretty, essentially, as you know, over the weekend, a last-minute situation. I don't know if you know. I don't know how normal you are, how much of a news follower you are. Not that those two things are necessarily completely opposed or completely contradictory, but sometimes they certainly can be. So, yeah, House deal passed in a pretty big way. And also in a pretty dramatic fashion, where 93 of the most right-wing, most socially conservative Republicans vote against the bill that McCarthy brings to the floor in the last minute, which is a quote-unquote clean continuing resolution, which means there's no priorities from either side kind of snuck in there, and it's just simple. We're keeping the government open for a few days, or not a few days. I think it's 47 days, 45 days extension up until November, which is going to give them obviously more time to negotiate and try and see a way through in terms of actually funding the government for the next year. So that fact that they essentially passed this stopgap measure with funding levels as is, so nothing really changed with regards to the current spending levels, so no major cuts, even though many cuts, both to Ukraine aid, to immigration, or increased immigration, all the Matt Gaetz parties, they're already on the table. But Gaetz, as we talked about in the last show, votes them down because they are not conservative enough, even though there's already deep cuts to things that he wanted, and improvements to things that he, to things he wanted to cut, like Ukraine and just general spending on entitlements, things like that. And there was also improvements on spending in terms of protecting the border. Gaetz votes for that, or kills that, along with, I think, 12 other Republicans. It comes to the floor again for a continuing resolution. Gaetz kind of getting the main blame for this, even though there were some other Republicans there as well. They say, okay, we're not going to do that. Well, okay, but we'll get the Democrats involved. Continuing resolution, keeping things essentially as is for 45 days to draw the playing field out further. They passed that on Saturday with 93 Republicans defecting, so a huge amount of Democratic support coming in and pushing Kevin McCarthy over the line, which is a pretty controversial thing and definitely something that did not look good for him. And that obviously brings us to today, where Matt Gaetz files this motion to vacate, because one of the big things of the condition, or the concession Kevin McCarthy had to make for allowing Matt Gaetz to be in speakership, or voting for, this concession Kevin McCarthy had to make for Matt Gaetz's vote is that any one and all the other kind of Republican rebels, holdouts in this 15-round speakership election that we saw at the beginning of the year, is that they're are essentially always going to have one person with the ability to essentially pull the trigger and say, Kevin McCarthy, you're out. We're doing another speakership election. And that is what Matt Gaetz has just done. Here in the New York Times, after days of warnings, Gaetz rose on Monday evening to bring up a resolution declaring the speakership vacant. That started a process that would force a vote within days on whether to keep McCarthy in his post. In doing so, Gaetz sought to subject McCarthy to a rare form of political punishment experienced by only two other speakers in the 234-year history of the House of Representatives. The move came just days after McCarthy opted to avert a government shutdown the only way he could, given that a sizable chunk, like 10 plus, would not essentially vote for any continuing resolution in terms of funding the government. They were just absolutely not accepting of his own party. They just would not back him, so he turned to the Democrats. He pushed through a stopgap spending bill over the objections of an unmovable block of hardliners of his own party, including Gaetz, who's kind of been the figurehead for all this. It was a brief but tense interruption of the day-to-day proceedings of the House. McCarthy was not present on the House floor when Gaetz made his motion, but scores of Democrats crowded in the aisles to watch the spectacle. The House adjourned shortly afterward, but under the chamber's rules, McCarthy and his leadership team will need to address it within 2 legislative days. It's becoming clear who the Speaker of the House works for, and it's not the Republican conference, said Gaetz earlier, making the case for McCarthy's ouster. By the way, he's the only person who has signed on to this yet, from what I can see, in essentially saying that he has allowed Biden to take his lunch money in every major negotiation. Gaetz cited McCarthy's dependence on Democrats to pass the funding bill, which was necessary to avert a shutdown because Gaetz and 20 of his colleagues opposed a temporary funding bill. And he also accused McCarthy of lying to his Republican members during his spending negotiations in making a secret deal with Democrats about funding of Ukraine, which, by the way, turns out was not so secret. There was a lot of pressure, a lot of very open pressure in terms of Capitol Hill circles from not just like people like Chuck Schumer, but also people like Mitch McConnell in the Senate to say we got to get this funding in for Ukraine. The move is a significant escalation of long-simmering power struggle between McCarthy and the clutch of conservative hardliners in his party. They have dangled the threat of dethroning the Speaker since he was elected, after subjecting him to a painful 15 votes. The reason why that 16th or 15th vote worked was because of that motion to vacate. That was a big concession McCarthy gave up, that anyone could essentially kick him out at any time. So McCarthy, a chronic optimist who has shown a remarkable willingness to weather political pain to maintain his grip on the Speaker's gavel, appeared undaunted minutes after Gaetz filed the resolution. He wrote on social media, "Bring it on. I think it's disruptive to the country, and my focus is only on getting our work done." McCarthy said earlier Monday, "I want to win the vote so I can finish the job for the American people. There are certain people who have done this since the day we came in." And certain people, he is clearly mainly thinking of Gaetz there. Okay, so here comes the important part, which is the politics of this situation. So can Gaetz kick McCarthy out, or can McCarthy survive this vote? So we know the way the House Democratic the House caucuses look like. There's a slim majority for the Republicans. They can only McCarthy can only afford to get from his side 6 anti-McCarthy votes, 6 anti-McCarthy votes. So Gaetz, he said, told reporters on Capitol Hill that he had sufficient GOP backing to prevail unless Democrats voted to save McCarthy, which could look pretty bad. Apparently, 4 other Republicans, Tim Burch of Tennessee, Eli Crane, and Andy Biggs of Arizona, and Bob Good of Virginia said they were open to supporting the motion. More have signaled openness to it as well. It remained to be seen, though, whether Democrats would help McCarthy, giving him those 5 extra yes votes or 6 extra yes votes that people like Burchett, Crane, Biggs, and Good would kind of take away from him. And it seems pretty clear that, if they did this, they would be getting something in exchange for it. They're just not going to, save McCarthy's skin for nothing. The hard right move to oust Speaker McCarthy from his post has presented House Democrats with a tricky question. Should they help rescue the California Republican who has worked against their agenda and recently opened an impeachment inquiry against President Biden? McCarthy's slender majority and the size of the band of right-wing rebels working to depose him means that he has little chance of surviving a vote to keep his job, which requires a majority without at least some support from Democrats. So it's looking pretty bad for McCarthy unless he doesn't make further concessions to the Democrats, which obviously would weaken him further in his own caucus. It's kind of a lose-lose situation. But it's nearly unheard of for members of the minority to vote with the opposing party's candidate for Speaker. Top party officials suggest that given McCarthy's multiple partisan transgressions, they would be exceedingly unlikely to do so now without a clear-cut commitment for him to engage Democrats in more governing. It's going to be interesting to see where they're thinking about, what they're thinking about asking for here, because this vote is going to come, and then, got to look down the road not too far. It's time for another, continuing resolution, or the government question, the government funding question comes up yet again. So yeah, I am not a cheap date, said Representative James McGovern of Massachusetts, the top Democrat on the Rules Committee, who, like other Democrats, said he has serious trust issues with the Speaker as they returned to work after a head-spinning Saturday when Congress adopted McCarthy's last-minute measure to keep the government open through mid-November. Senior Democrats said they had made no firm decision whether it would help them beat back a challenge from Representative Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida. Multiple Democrats said they had expected to take a unified position on the fate of the Speaker and said they would meet Tuesday morning to begin the process of determining what they would do, saying, let's see what happens. I mean, I think it could be pretty interesting to see what they can get in terms of concessions for the upcoming, budget negotiations or anything future down the road when it comes to dealing with, future Biden budget priorities ahead of, or any political priorities ahead of the 2024 election. Either way, McCarthy is going to have to make some pretty damaging concessions to either the Democrats or his hard right flank. And honestly, it's a pretty unenviable situation for him either way. I am one Democrat not in much of a mood to help him out, said Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland. MAGA Republicans have to solve the problem that MAGA Republicans create. Again, would be absolutely political malpractice for Democrats to kind of get in the middle of this and bail McCarthy out for absolutely nothing, which, thank God, it does not seem like they will do. Again, so it's probably, I wouldn't be surprised if right now, as we're recording this kind of in the middle of the night between, Tuesday and Monday, with the vote coming probably later on Tuesday at the earliest, Hakeem Jeffries and Ken McCarthy maybe in some negotiations talking about, what do you want for, to get you, if Kevin McCarthy is saying to Hakeem Jeffries, what do you want me to give you to get your party on side to help us, shut up Matt Gaetz once and for all. So their choices include siding with McCarthy's right-wing detractors and voting to remove him, joining most Republicans and backing him, or helping him in more passive ways, either failing to show up for the vote or voting present, both of which would lower the threshold needed for him to win a majority and keep his job. So these are any either passive, unpassive, whatever way. If you're helping McCarthy, you absolutely have to get something in return. While the antagonism toward McCarthy is strong among Democrats, some of them also fear that deposing the Speaker in this fashion could damage the institution. Oh, no. Not the wonderfully functioning, well-respected institution of the House of Representatives where all the smartest people reside, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, please. This is the very same institution that puts her and Lauren Boebert back in office every few years, at least in recent vintage. So, let's not get too uppity about that. From accomplishing much legislatively when lawmakers now face a mid-November deadline to fund the government. They also worry about what and who could come next. One top ally of McCarthy, Representative Patrick McHenry, Republican of North Carolina, began making the argument Monday that Democrats need to think long-term. I think we'll have a far more functional House with his speakership going forward than any other person. Again, functional for what? There hasn't been much they're able to do other than, open an impeachment inquiry on Biden, which, as, problematic as some of the things that Hunter has done over the years, it just not seeming to be the most evidence-based endeavor. One top ally of McCarthy, Representative Patrick McHenry, made that case, but as of Monday evening, McCarthy had not approached Democrats with any offer in exchange for their help, and Democrats had not yet reached out to him with an ask, according to people in both camps familiar with the matter who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss it. And by the way, if you see tomorrow that they come in and vote for this guy in any way, or they don't show up and allow him to win, that is with nothing in exchange, no concessions asked. When Kevin McCarthy was, surely down on his luck, and Republicans were, in like just begging, and in so much turmoil, just begging for any sort of help, any sort of relief in this situation. It's just complete political malpractice. They have to extract something. So some of the things that they're including are, unfortunately, the first thing you see is more funding for Ukraine. I guess, if that's what you're really going to push them to go to battle. But some of them are more smart in terms of federal projects in Democrats' districts, and honoring the deal on spending levels that McCarthy reached this year with Biden. That was for the debt ceiling, just keeping those levels the same. I think that would be, not the craziest win, but, not a win or a loss for, the Democrats, just keeping the deal that they already agreed with to McCarthy. But, of course, all those would draw a backlash from Republicans. Some people have also floated the idea, Democratic side, that they could ask for co-chairs for committees, giving them more power on committees they should be by rights in the minority in, removing right-wing Republicans from the Rules Committee, and even obtaining a promise that GOP campaign committees will not spend money to defeat politically vulnerable Democrats. Helping McCarthy is not without political risks for Democrats. Should they go to bat for the Speaker, their own voters may not be pleased with an effort to rescue Republican leaders who had allied himself so closely with former President Donald J. Trump and invested so much political capital in tearing down Mr. Biden. So I think the big thing there is, are they going to help with a concession attached, or are they going to help for free? I think it's a big difference. I think the base sees it that way. It's a big difference between those two things. And then, of course, engaging with the Democrats probably is going to backfire more on the Speaker than on the party, giving Republicans who aren't happy with him for over the spending measure more ammunition to push for his ouster. So if any wind of that happens, that could cause more Republicans to feel the political heat. A lot of things going on, but I think the biggest thing to watch for is this big vote upcoming on Tuesday, the first opening gambit of the speakership vote, which McCarthy, it could happen over the next, at least for the next few days, this motion to vacate. How many Republicans are going to, support that? And also, will there be any Democratic concessions that they managed to extract from McCarthy to help in exchange for Democrats helping McCarthy to keep his job? So we will figure that out. But until then, we have more things to talk about. And it is a pretty great day when I see a Seamus Malek Fazali article in the, that's Malek Fazali. I hope I'm saying that right. I apologize if I'm not. One of the best foreign policy writers on the left, hands down, talking about the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Israel relationship. In the past year and a half, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the American media has been encased in one narrative. This is a war for the soul of a Western world. NATO has rediscovered its importance, finding its footing once again as the global backstop against tyranny and the world's greatest defender of democracy. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the most supreme of NATO member states, the United States, is seeking to broker a peace deal between two countries that have not been at war for almost 50 years, Israel and Saudi Arabia, and a deal that reports indicate may involve the United States signing a pact of mutual defense with the Gulf monarchy, and perhaps even one with Israel as well, which is really quite alarming, to say the least, to try and bring these two, obviously the goal for the U.S. is here to bring these two together under the kind of United States security umbrella. And it's like really, really remarkable stuff to see this whole situation developing here, because it does not portend well for what some may call peace in the Middle East. The deal is now in motion as part of a renewed push of the Abraham Accords, a series of foreign policy achievements brokered by the Trump administration, which Israel, again, made that peace. In reality, again, some of these accords were, were kind of less peace deals rather than just you give me this, I give you, recognizing Israel. Morocco would enter the accords in return for the United States recognizing their occupation of the Western Sahara. Sudan would sign their name to the deal in return for the United States removing them from the state sponsor of terrorism list. And in Saudi Arabia, the geopolitical kingmaker of all the Gulf Arab states, they are gunning for the biggest payout of them all. This is this defense deal, and this mutual defense deal, this ensured security deal, this idea that, if the United States sees Saudi Arabia is in trouble, it has a responsibility to come in and protect and defend them. But already announced is Saudi Arabia's part in a massive trade corridor initiative wherein new shipping, internet, and railway lines would pass from the EU to India through both Israel and the Gulf Kingdom in question. The bigger piece of the puzzle is Saudi Arabia's desire to begin what they claim would be a civilian nuclear program. A nuclear program is not necessarily evidence of a wish to build nuclear weapons, as the long-standing debate over Iran makes clear, but Saudi Arabia's insistence on this line of argumentation for their own side received its most recent upending by the Crown Prince himself, who said in an interview with Fox News, if they, meaning Iran, get one, we have to get one too. So again, this civilian nuclear program, sounding more and more civilian by the day, not. Western supporters of Saudi Arabia's position cannot make their argument very easily, as much of their conservative opposition to Iran's nuclear program has been based on the notion that an undemocratic Islamist state can't be trusted with something as potentially dangerous as nuclear energy. So, again, it's obviously completely, totally different when it's the undemocratic Islamist state that we happen to like and get oil from. So nevertheless, voices have appeared ignoring all pretenses of being honest and unhypocritical in places like the Wall Street Journal, insisting that Saudi Arabia should not be scolded for pursuing nuclear energy and that risk can be managed. And of course, those voices have come from think tanks flush with nearly $1 million from Saudi government-aligned organizations. The argument for a defense pact with Saudi Arabia is now being placed squarely within the renewed disdain for detente within Iran by MBS, which is pretty interesting considering what the Saudi Arabian diplomatic corps has been doing in terms of big-time rapprochement with Iran. But the big guy, MBS, has always been a little bit more skeptical. MBS's own promises to the Palestinians, which, by the way, were much less of anything his kind of fellow Gulf kings and monarchs were inclined to do, just saying that he wanted to ease the life of the Palestinians. The Saudi crown prince, who said in 2017 that his country will work so that the battle is for them in Iran, not in Saudi Arabia, clearly has his mind focused on something else. This open appetite for brinksmanship would be deeply concerning at any time when a defense pact with America is being discussed, even more so. While Saudi Arabia would seek ironclad protection from the United States, kind of formalizing an arrangement everyone kind of knew was already there is not unfathomable because, frankly, the Houthis, backed by Iran, kind of just kicked their ass. Saudi Arabia has really kind of a bad military, and if they are starting to realize, and especially when it comes to this big new trade corridor that is going to go through Israel and Saudi Arabia that the United States wants to support, if especially they want to assert their regional dominance over Iran in the context of that, they know that they're going to need some United States help because they had that for Yemen and it turned out bad, but they're going to need some real ironclad United States help when it comes to any sort of bigger, more serious, more head-on conflict with Iran. Iran's military forces, in the event of a conflict, could also threaten critical Gulf desalination plants that supply the country's water, not to mention the oil infrastructure that virtually powers the world. But a defense pact does not ensure the future that MBS envisions, where Iran is indefinitely kept at bay and a benevolent Pax Saudica reigns. A permanent enshrinement of Cold War with Iran, one now with even greater stakes, is far more likely to increase the chance of war than extinguish it. One does not have to look far for cases in which defense treaties have helped investigate or instigate conflict. World War I, your classic historical, school example. If you remember back from the, the late high school days, I don't know, whenever, you learned about World War I, if you're listening to this in school. Years of sanctions in this particular context and threats of war have already spurred discussions of nuclear weapon production within Iran that were previously taboo, and now looking at their window, they're like, hey, if Saudi Arabia and Tehran Saudi Arabia and Israel are getting closer and closer and they're going to get backed by the United States, why don't we start spurring up our nuclear program that, by the way, the United States broke the deal that we were going to stop doing. They broke that Iranian nuclear deal. How about we kick our program up into higher gear, which would, be objectively bad for the world. While even conservative voices are quick to shut down suggestions of weaponization, there is no guarantee the next supreme leader, whoever that might be, won't have different ideas. And while the United States may not desire war with Iran now under President Biden, there is no guarantee that the next president, whoever that might be, very well could be Trump, will continue such policies. So, really interesting moment and interesting thing to watch on what's going on here with Saudi Arabia and Israel and how the U.S. Commits to backing them up, either militarily or, financially as well. But I think, militarily is probably going to be the more relevant one to watch there. All right, so we are going to move on now to our last story of the day, and it comes from The Intercept and from Josh Gottheimer, who is up to some pretty interesting business in his home state of New Jersey, as we get, we narrowly avoided, but seemed like for a little bit we were going to have a government shutdown, and that is with his good friends over at No Labels, which is the Political Action Committee, and that's just general, I think, political group, I guess you could call it, that is kind of hoping to run. I think it's almost kind of hard to imagine a kind of a centrist third party effort, coming in there against someone like President Joe Biden from someone like Joe Manchin, but it does seem like that is happening at this point. They've severely floated it. They're really considering it at this point. But Josh Gottheimer is another one who is really tied in with this. He's reiterated his opposition to the effort in 2024 in a written statement to The Intercept. This is not an effort I'm personally involved with or supportive of because the worst thing that could happen is that we inadvertently elect an extremist like Donald Trump, he said. But Gottheimer's attempted balancing act is not convincing everyone, saying, this is a New Jersey Democratic operative, quote, Gottheimer's actions embracing No Labels right now and cashing their donors' checks speaks volumes louder than his empty words, which kind of suggests that he could have his eyes, if not or not on the presidency, on something else, which would be the New Jersey governorship. Apparently he's done with Washington and is moving on to the more controlled, but also one would argue, I think, more better if you're trying to pursue a long-term political career because your name's going to be more in the spotlight position of governorship of New Jersey, where they got Phil Murphy. I don't know if he can run for more than 2 terms, but he just barely, got reelected in 2021. And it seems like Gottheimer is kind of laying the groundwork, getting in touch with all the right donors for the ability to try and come and compete for that next governorship spot. The Embattled Senators Leadership PAC, this is Bob Menendez, current senator of New Jersey, donated $10,000 to Gottheimer and other New Jersey Democrats in the last election cycle. Gottheimer, he did return the money, but he returned $3,300 of it to the congressional campaign of Menendez's son, Rob Menendez, who has emphatically defended his father days after the indictment and said he'll host a fundraiser for him in the coming weeks. So Gottheimer is the co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which Manchin founded, interestingly enough, back in 2014. Since then, though, Manchin's main political accomplishments have been spiking child poverty by repealing the child tax credit, and probably the most important legislative achievement of our lifetimes, which is changing the Senate dress code to, rule out John Fetterman's shirts and hoodies. But yeah, problem solving, he says, is not just a slogan. It's a real idea that members are willing to organize around and make a priority. Gottheimer also helped to create the Problem Solvers Caucus. So this is from Nancy Jacobson in a 2022 interview. When Gottheimer first entered Congress in 2017, she created it. Nancy Jacobson says, I created the whole thing, and we put Congressman Gottheimer in there. In fact, but I created the Problem Solvers. We raised so much money for all these members, and I think that's my biggest accomplishment, creating No Labels and the Problem Solvers Caucus. So again, it's going to be really interesting to see what they do. Could it be some sort of rebellion of some, elites choosing their puppet candidates who are unhappy with the policies of Biden? Certain leads from certain sectors, maybe some people who are unhappy with his treatment of Ukraine or Afghanistan or the climate, or it could be, any or labor issues. It could be any variety of things that they want to, poke from Biden out. But are they going to be willing to really do something quite bold, I'm going to say, and really just jeopardize the chances, any real serious chances of stopping Trump by really hamstringing Biden by running someone like Joe Manchin to take and dig into all of Biden's newly accrued support in the general election in places like Philadelphia, the outskirts of Philadelphia, outskirts of Georgia, or Atlanta, Georgia, and Phoenix, and places like that, and all those places where these suburban moderate Republicans where they made a lot of gains. It could be really easy pickings for someone like Joe Manchin. Will they actually do that? Will they risk, doing the ultimate anti-establishment thing and reelecting Trump? Unless they're willing to do that, they are still going to be influential. They're still going to be worth watching. They're going to be a threat and a force on the political stage, as they always were. But, I think they definitely take it up a step, and they raise the stakes of the game if they're going to in any way try and endanger Joe Biden's chances at re-election by running someone like Joe Manchin in 2024. And, I find it hard to believe that elites could be that mad at Biden to do this and fund some sort of elite back run in the form of a Joe Manchin 2024 third-party no-labels campaign. But, until they do something like that, they're just your average run-of-the-mill rich donors as far as I'm concerned. All right. That is all the time we have for you today and all the stories as well. We'll be back on Wednesday. It's Newsflash.